Thank you so much. For me, it's a real pleasure to be here. And I usually stay in front of the desk. And I would like to thank all these colleagues and my dear friend Patrick to inviting me here. And what I'm gonna do today in this around 30 minutes speech, is to not to go deep in philosophy, but to see how from the Western part of the world we are receiving and we popularize some specific Daoist ideas in the history of last century. And most of all, what I'm interested in at the moment is to see how two key concepts of Taoism are received today and promoted inside China and outside China. But first of all, I used to begin my speech with this quote from Song Dynasty priest Taoist philosopher Du Daojian, who gives an idea of the methodology and the applied to my research. He says, each time the Tao has descended to the earth, it has been different. Thus, Han Dynasty commentators produce a Han Laozi, Jin Dynasty commentators produce a Jin Laozi, and so on. So the idea is that each time we receive some idea or some text, in this case, we tend to contextualize in the time and in the place. So we have to think as a process of editing, process of understanding, not as meaning stuck in the time. The time is written, for example. So here I will talk about how the contemporary global understanding of Taoism is shaped or influenced by its previous reception in the West, in Europe, and my previous research was in Latin America, so I cover all the Western part, if we call Latin America as West. How the circulation and selection of certain ideas determine the current status of Taoism, and last, how the selection of specific ideas plays an important role in the popularization of Taoism. These specific ideas I will focus on are two. First of all, I will give a concise history of Western reception. When we talk about Western reception of Taoism, we talk about the view of Taoism as textual-based religion philosophy. We don't talk about so much of the Taoism as living tradition as the last part of the 20th century. So we talk about especially one text, which is the Laozi Tao Te Ching. And the last contemporary vehicles of promotion of Taoism, I will focus on two key concepts. One is self-cultivation technologies. With technologies, I borrow a technical term from Foucault, from Sloterdijk anthropotechnics, which are the kind of techniques, practices that help the human being to transform and bettering or preserving, the health preservation, toward the preservation. And the second one is really interesting because this comes also from China, but as its roots in the West, the relationship between the contemporary Taoism with environmentalism, which is inside the agenda of the Chinese Taoist Association right now. So, beginning from the end, just to set these ideas, this couple of years have been really important for Taoism, for contemporary Taoism, because they just established the World Federation of Taoism, and in this federation, for example, the vice presidents are the Taoist Church of Italy, Taoist Church from Spain, and from Mexico. So it's more or less cover my place of expertise. And they are organizing in those years some international forum that to set a manifesto how to promote and popularize Taoism inside China and outside China, and what is the contribute of Taoism in contemporary society. So it's really interesting to analyze this kind of documents. So I just quote two manifesto, two statements for the last two international forum, selecting the point that I am really interested to. So here, the last one that I was honored to be in China, in Maoshan, in September of last year, I report this: we show uphold the traditional Taoist ideology of unity between heaven and humanity, and Tao model itself after nature, promoting holistic well-being and encouraging harmonious coexistence between humanity and nature. Here I'm really interested in 2 points, which are holistic well-being, so the promotion of Taoism, I repeat myself, with the self-cultivation practices, which take roots in the West, with also, of course, part in the traditional Chinese history, and the harmonious coexistence between humanity and nature. They convey these 2 key aspects with 2 technical terms, Tianren Heyi, Tao Fa Zeran, which are the first 2 over there. Tianren Heyi, well, I'll explain now. Tianren Heyi is not just a Taoist term, it's like a Chinese philosophical term, because we find Tianren Heyi in Neo-Confucianism, for example, from Song Dynasty on, but we also find previous, not directly the term, but the concept in Taoist writings. So the idea that human and nature are in continuity, in harmonious continuity. And Tao Fa Zeran, it has a really interesting story, but I will talk about later. And here another quote from the previous manifesto, which is almost the same. So the key concepts of health-preserving exercises, medical achievement. Here the emphasis is on self-cultivation, because Wudanshan is where Qigong Taiji Chuan was born, so the emphasis is more on that. So if you want to schematize these 2 concepts, we see on the one hand Yanshen, which is the first technology for healing, health, longevity, and ideologically and the religious part of Taoism think about immortality. But on the other hand, we have Tao Fa Zeran, so the relationship between Tao, which is, we can say, the human relation with the infrastructure of the cosmos, of the beings, Tao, in relation with the nature. So, and between the connection between the environmental part and the self-cultivational part is Tianren Heyi. And the idea here is that we cannot think about they are shaping like that. We cannot think about healthy human being if we do not think about a healthy environment. So, and on the contrary, we cannot think about a healthy environment without thinking about a healthy human being. They are in connection. The understanding of nature are the extended self. So if you harm the nature, you harm yourself. If you harm yourself, you harm the nature. This is the idea that at the moment Chinese Taoist Association are promoting. And this is, of course, historical basis. Here I will go really, really quickly, because it's a long journey and it's nothing new. So if you think about how we receive Taoism, how we currently shape Taoism, we have to think about how Taoism got here, how Taoism was received and was promoted, through which channels, through which vehicles. So I divided here 3 basic phases. This one is not a real phase, it's a proto-reception of Taoism, basically through the understanding of Jesuits, Matteo Ricci and Trigo, Kircher, they call it Taoism as aberration, superstition, because they were in contact with Taoism as a living tradition, as religious culture, as with all the rituals that involve Taoism. Not so much about text, but we can say that at this time, with this approach to Chinese religions, Chinese philosophy, we start to think about Chinese philosophy as a textual-based tradition. This is the really huge problem of Western reception of Chinese philosophy. If we think about Chinese philosophy just as textual-based tradition, we leave apart all the living tradition they were at the time and they are right now, of course. This is the very beginning of reception. The very beginning of reception of Taoism is from the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century. And here there are two really interesting and important factors. On one end, we have the establishment of sinology as an academic discipline in the Collège de France. So we beginning to see Chinese literature, Chinese history as academic, scientific matters through this lens. On the other hand, we have at the same time interest through spiritualism, through esoteric groups, with Oriental philosophy, Oriental ideas, not from the Orient, especially from the ideas from India and Hindus, Buddhism, but it's beginning of most of all from the end of the 19th century. We have also the beginning of interest toward Taoism, and here the fact is that, for example, Theosophic Society, with the publisher, the lot of publishers they had, and the intellectual networks they had around Europe and United States, and also Latin American, they start to spread Taoist works. They start to spread Taoist ideas. But they start to spread with their own understanding of what is Taoism, what are the ideas of Taoism. So overemphasizing especially the mystical aspect of Taoism. When we talk about mysticism, when we talk about Taoism as mystic philosophy, this is not only the esoteric groups, also a lot of academic scholars understood Taoism through the lens of mysticism, through the lens of Christianity mysticism, for example. But they emphasize the practical part of Taoism related to one text or two texts, but especially one text, the Lao Tzu Tao Te Ching. And so when we emphasize an aspect of a text which is not directly emerged from the text, is like a reconstruction of a text, it influenced the spread of the ideas related to the text. So I will go back here after with that, and just to see the last phases, if we take out the contemporaneity, the contemporary status. The last phases of reception begins from the second half part of the 20th century, from the 60s, we can say 60s, 70s, when we have the establishment of Taoism in the West. We have the Tao fever. We have the Taoism that began to be part of the mystical Orient brand. So basically, what we know outside the academy, what we know about Taoism are related to this period, most of all. And in this period, they are shaping the ideas, these two ideas, reinforcing the mystical aspect of Taoism, but toward a nature-loving mysticism. So the connection between human and nature, quietism, inner peace, interest on Taoism, body, mind, technology. To see Taoism as a set of practice in order to healing, health preservation, and so on. And it's really interesting because for example, Taoism became an important part of some, in the United States, of some groups related to hidden protection movement of California. For example, here we have New Age authors like Alan Watts, Blofeld, Li Yutang, Ursula Le Guin, and with the self-help literature, with Wayne Diner, Seven Mitchell, Arder, and so on, so on. So, I said before, when we talk about reception of Taoism, we talk about reception of textual-based philosophy. Textual-based philosophy, the selection of the 1,000 and more texts, Taoist texts, are cut off in favor of one text, which is the Tao Te Ching. Of course, we have also the Zhuanzi. A little more, we have also the Liezi, but this is the text that we know, everyone knows in the West, also in China, of course. There is a really interesting project going on now in China, in Nankai University, with Professor Misha Tad, that is called Lao Tzegetic Center, that analyze all the translations, Western translation, not Western, global translation that they had to related with the Lao Tzu. I was dealing with Latin American translations, and he counts around 2060 something. It's really difficult to give numbers. So 2060 something different translation of the Lao Tzu Tao Te Ching in 2 centuries, from 19th century to now. And in Latin America, I counted 58, but it's now already past 2 years, so of course there are 60 and something. Authored translation of Tao Te Ching. If we think about without authors translation, we have 1,000 maybe, 2,000, 3,000, I don't know. But there's a lot of translation of Tao Te Ching. Why? Here I try to, when we talk about translation, we have so many different approaches, but for my purpose, I divide into 2, just to see how these 2 key concepts can be found in these 2 approaches. And I divided academic reading, borrowing a term from Isabelle Robinet, who calls the approach to Lao as school of readings, and mystical spiritual reading. Basically, I divided, taking these methods to categorize them. What's really important here is that the academic reading focus on first-hand approach, direct to the language, using Chinese sources, and emphasizing philological purpose. And when is emphasized philosophical purpose, they use Western philosophy categories. And on the other end, we have a second-hand approach, so translation of translations, or a mix of several translations. What Nathan Hatch called populist hermeneutics, so using of plain languages, common sense, and easy to convey to the population outside academy. And the difference here is really important. On one end, we have the originalist approach. What does it mean? It means that when we translate Tao Te Ching, when we read Tao Te Ching, we want to uncover the authentic meaning of the text, which for the Tao Te Ching is quite impossible. We don't know the author, we don't know the time of editing, we don't know almost anything. So we have a lot of theories, we can probably say that, but we don't, it's really hard to be sure what does it mean. or the old text. On the other hand, so outside the academy, we have a tendency to contextualize at the present reader the meaning of Tao Te Ching. This also with a lot of lens. For example, in the self-help literature, we want to convey some technologies and practices that can be found in the Tao Te Ching and applied to the contemporary reader how can improve himself, for example. No? So what is important here that the scriptural translation tends to want to contextualize in the time the reader read the text, no? Not uncovering any meaning at all. So overlapping ideas is important here. Both of the reading consider Lao Tzu as an enigmatic work. So it's not so we cannot surprise if we found Lao Tzu in esoteric or neo-esoteric circles, because is it an enigmatic work? We don't know what that means. This is a scholar, Welch, who said that. There's a lot of scholar inside academy in the last 50 and more years that say that it's impossible to translate. No? And another overlapping ideas, I'm going faster because I'm worth. That Lao Tzu is a mystical text, as I said before, with the focus on self-cultivation. A lot of authors from Jasper Gilles, Maspero Schwartz, but I can count a lot of them, that understand Lao Tzu, not only the text, also the characters, as a mystic. And this is also used in the self-help context, because this cultivation part is really marketable, no? Is really useful for a contemporary society who wants to, in a therapeutic society, when we want to improve ourselves. No? And the third one is the nature-oriented mysticism, which is really interesting because it becomes to be a brand during the 60s. One of the first was Alan Watts, who understood the Tao Te Ching as a journey into this new mode of consciousness that gives one a marvelous enhanced appreciation of pattern in nature. And now, in the academic circles, there's a lot of works that begin to talk about the relationship between environmentalism and Taoism in a different angle, of course. For example, James Miller talked about Taoism as green religion, and Nelson as the relationship between Taoism and environmentalism. And so focusing, when I talk about, for example, this kind of relation, I don't mean that in Chinese tradition there's no this meaning. There is a meaning. There is this kind of oriented toward nature aspect. But here we talk about an emphasis, no? To take out some other aspect and emphasize this one aspect in particular. And yeah, I'm going directly to these are some technical terms that we find in Taoist texts, especially in the Lao Tzu, not the first, because Yangshan doesn't appear in the Lao Tzu, but indirectly, but is related in some part of it. It appears in Zhuangzi, for example. But here I want to focus in two terms, Wu Wei and Tao Fa Zeran. And I give some practical example. Wu Wei, we can talk about Wu Wei in many different ways. And it depends where we put it, depends in which context, it depends in which chapter of the Lao Tzu or in which chapter of the Zhuangzi. In these self-cultivation and nature-oriented discourses, one of the main characters is Wu Wei. For example, James Miller in this Taoism as green religion talk about taking this chapter of Wu Wei as diminishing and emptying until one becomes attuned to things and can respond to them in their self-sureness. So the idea is that the connection between self-cultivation and environment preservation, if we do away, we are diminishing ourselves, we emptying ourselves to get to the point where we internally get inner peace, stability, quiet, without passions, and on the environment we are not overact to the environment. We don't consider the environment as a object to exploit, and we let things to be themselves. So it took from chapter 48. There's a lot of reading of this chapter. On the right, you have the hidden potential movement interpretation of 48, which is not so different from the other. We have another key passage after that is better. In the pursuit of Tao, every day something is dropped until non-action is achieved. The idea that we have to drop the ego to get in a status of emptiness, to be not ourselves anymore, which they intended to be our authentic selves. So the overexploitation of this idea of actualization of the self. But the most interesting one for me is the Tao of Ziran, because to understand Ziran as nature, as Chan Wensing clearly does, and many others after them, is not really in a Chinese tradition. Ziran, there's a lot of interpretation of what does it mean, this Ziran, but until the 20th century, we don't have the relationship between Ziran and nature. There is from Japan. In Japan, they're starting to understanding the character Ziran as nature, and the first Westerner that translate Ziran as nature is Chan Wensing in the 50s. Man could the last, and Tao model itself after nature. The interesting part, if we read John Woo, for example, Tao follow its own ways, Ziran. So the interesting part here that right now Chinese Taoist Association and Taoism in general promoting its greening agenda is using this chapter, is using this pattern, Tao of Ziran, and understanding Ziran as nature. So it's like the reinterpretation or Western interpretation of the Tao Te Ching. The last example here is really in the hidden potential movement, or this kind of self-technologies, because we have, for example, the scholarly interpretation of Pao Pu in Lao Tzu 19 is to hold uncovered block. It's like all the simplicity to be simple. But we have in California, Zhao Fufeng and Jane English that translated to see to the simplicity to realize one's true nature. So Pao Pu understood as the effort to recover one authentic self. No? So to put in practice this kind of self-cultivation technologies, body-mind technologies or psychotechnologies, there's a lot of meaning inside here. And I will conclude with the some point of the fate statement and 5 years plan of Chinese Taoist Association right now that focus on this part. Tao of Ziran, as I said before, cultivate the way of non-action in relation to nature, let nature be itself, exploring the unique advantages of Daoism, philosophy, culture and arts, ecological environmental protection, medicine, healthcare to adapt contemporary society, carry on out, and so on. For example, there's another one. Yeah, carry out the spirit of unity and love, helping people, work and benefit people. So we see that they use these two kind of ideas coming from the Western interpretation of Taoism to promote Taoism. This is 5-year plans in China, and used also by the World Federation of Taoism, so to also popularize Taoism outside China. So in this effort of globalized Taoism. So here's the conclusion, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Filippo. Gibt es vielleicht ad hoc Fragen an den Vortragenden zum Thema?
Okay, sorry.
Thank you very much for your interesting lecture. And two questions. We received a lot of interpretations of Daoism. Daoism as a mystical, or Daoism spiritual way, or the Daoism from the philological approach, the philosophical and comparative philosophical approach, and also interdisciplinary approach, Dao and physics, like chakra. How do you mean if we can integrate all these aspects under the category of Daoism, or this cutting dimension of mysticism and the philological or the philosophical scientific Daoism remain?
I think we remain, because when we receive, or when not only receive, when we analyze one tradition, we tend to categorize and put in a box. This is what it is. This is what it is. This is what it is. And we tend to close the box without get the box to talk about with the other box. So, but it's a really artificial approach. This doesn't mean, if you think about Taoism, the Western effort was to categorize Taoism in something. So, as a religion with Jesuits, as a philosophy when in Europe was important to categorize as a philosophy to promote the ideas. So taking out all the religion stuff. As a new way to see humanity or the world, as in Tao's of physics, or Tao's of motorcycle, the Tao's of everything, of Poe, there was Tao's of Poe also. It's just a way to taking apart, put it here, and try to understanding in its own way. So, but at the end, we have to think about this kind of traditions, but everything as a process of evolving process. So, the Taoism we are talking about now is not the Taoism of Han Dynasty. It is not the Taoism in the 19th century. And also, if you no, I didn't write it. But if you analyze the faith statement of Taoism now, one point is like, we have to recover aspects of Taoism that can be adaptable in contemporary society. If not is adaptable, is gonna die soon. And it's, as we can apply the same method of text, classical text. If we think about classical texts without authors, without really dates of writings, without a lot of things, as we want to uncover the truth of that text, is a dying effort, is unuseful. So we have to think about a process of receiving the text and understanding at the contemporaneity, how can we exploit some part of the text for our purpose. I think it's more useful.
Said something.
Yeah, of course.
Western way of thinking categorizes. This is the mysticism, this is the philosophy, but the Daoism is a whole one. And I think this character comes from the Chinese script. The principal meaning remains in the 1,000 years, in which we can combine some words in the Chinese script, and it emerges always a new meaning.
Yeah, of course.
And therefore, the second question is, how can Daoism influence, for example, in a time of climate change, ecological crisis, and the natural catastrophe? Dao Zhuran, this idea, the Wu Wei idea, can contribute a lot of things for the people and for our suffering.
I think this is really useful, because taking some ideas from some tradition, from other tradition, every tradition, and make it used no? And transforming, of course, because the context is different. So transforming and adapt to the present is really useful. For example, with this kind of, which is a really hot topic now in China, in the agenda of Shentai Wenming, the building of ecological civilization. No? They use Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, but not only in China, also in Japan with Buddhism, with Zen, for example, they're using in greening agenda. How can this philosophy can contribute to bettering, to eco-friendly mode of living, no? And there's a lot of concepts that we can take it from this kind of text. Wei, Ziran, but also Sambao, which I was putting here. Sambao is the three treasure: to be frugal, to be simple, do not overexploit some from society or from the environment. But the most useful one, I think, is the idea, for me, is the idea of extended selves that can be grasped from Taoist philosophy, which is Tianren Hei also. The meaning of we have to understand that the environment and the self are, in a mystical way also, are connected. So if we think about, I cannot preserve my health if his environment is not healthy, no? The direct connection between the elements, no? Which is really in Chinese philosophy. It's really in the Western interpretation of Chinese philosophy also, no? The emphasis, overemphasis of this aspect. Tianren Hei is really useful from Confucianism and from Taoism in both span.
Es gab vorher hier eine Wortmeldung und dann.
Thank you very much for this very inspiring talk, and I think what you laid out here for us is a kind of phenomenology of the way in which Taoism is discussed.
Yeah.
Different discourses over time. Of course, you showed us how to navigate somehow between these different claims to present us with a true Taoist. And you also, I think, showed very clearly that this doesn't work because there is no such thing as a true representation of one kind of school of thought that is as diverse and dynamic. Still, I would like to ask you if you don't think that there could be a more rigorous reading of the standards of reading.
Yeah.
Lao Tzu, for example. That doesn't mean that we have to expect, and it cannot mean that we can expect a true reading, but not because it's very, very esoteric, but maybe because it's a poem.
Yeah.
The kind of text that it is. How do we read a poem? We don't expect truth. We expect inspiration. We expect guidance. We expect something different than from a kind of analytical or legal text.
Yeah.
So this is one thing. So maybe there is something in the way of a more rigorous reading of the original text that would help us to avoid some of the interpretations that don't lead us anywhere, except for saying, well, we can do whatever we like.
Yeah, of course.
I think this would not do justice to the fact that after thousands of years, this tradition is philosophically and as part of social practice very much, and even I think increasingly cherished in China and other places. When you mention Yangshan, for example, it gives a very clear hint. It has something to do with healthy life. When you come back to the keynote in the beginning, when you talked about humanism and post-humanism, this does not at all lend itself to post-humanism because it means to lead a healthy life. Yeah. It means you have to do something with your life. You have to nourish yourself. You have to think about the interaction between sexes. You have to deal with you as a physical, as a life. This is maybe the key word for this kind of Daoism. So this is one remark, and the other has to do with the language issue. When you presented us with the translations in this very nice slide where you had these three symbols there, I think it's very clear that when we translate into German or English or French or whatever Latin-based language, we tend to nominalize everything.
Yeah.
When you talk about Tianren Hei, well, it's not unity, it's an action. It's a process,
Yeah, a process.
to unify, and then you change the entire discourse. You cannot talk about unity. You talk about balancing and developing, and this applies to many things. When many sentences that make it much more easy, as you just mentioned. It's a dynamic, it's a process, and it's so maybe it has to do with the kind of premature approach. This is maybe a German snobbish attitude, but I firmly believe that. Spending a lot of time dealing with these matters, and I believe that they have an agenda, these people, and they may be Christians, they may be green priests, or whatever their agenda may be, and they can borrow eclectically from whatever they find in this treasure house.
Yeah.
But I think that has nothing to do with what they wanted to say. They didn't want to talk to us, the authors, whoever that might be. They expressed something, and we're invited to search for the wisdom that we want to take from it. But so this is where I stop. What do you think about this?
Beginning from the end, with Thierry Henry, I'm totally in according. I agree with you. Because if we think about the reception of Thierry Henry, talking about reception, to understand Thierry Henry as unity, it's been used for mystical approach. If we think about unity, the unity between human and the heaven, and the heaven as a god, or heaven as a supernatural being, so we emphasize the mystical aspect. But as you said, He is a continuity. It's more a continuity, harmonious continuity, but it's not a fact. So the idea is that we have to act in tune with to get this complicity between the two, which is what Taoism is taking from this pattern. Terenzo Hui is how to be attuned with the environment. So I go back to the extended self, to this kind of continuity, no? And so it's a matter of how we receive this concept, but not how we receive because we receive and we understand like that. It's like this is our understanding and so on. No, it's like what our purpose in receiving this kind of stuff. Why in the history that I showed before, the time we received the Taoism was through some channels that wants to politically, ideologically wants to convey this idea of Tao, or this idea of Taoism, because the purpose was that, was to promote this kind of philosophy as a mystical philosophy, as a new kind of, because the West was in decadence, we want a new spiritual approach, a new energy from the East, but not the East right now, was the East of 2,000 years ago, because of course we cannot say that Taoist religion is good now because they are a colony, so we don't want. So when the point is here, we have to think about our pre-categorization, our precondition when we receive something. Why we don't want to, we receive and we want to interpret that at the time. And the first thing about Tao Te Ching is really hard. About Tao Te Ching, there are a lot of more rigorous approach to the Tao Te Ching, but they need to be, of course, contextualized at the time of the redaction, of the edition of the text. So, for example, it's easiest to find Guodian Tao Te Ching. I know that Guodian Tao Te Ching was 300 before Christ. So we have the contextualization, we have the place where it was edited. So more or less, I can give a thick description, using a Gadamer terms, of that time. The problem is when we deal with texts previous of Guodian or after Guodian, we don't know when the Tao Te Ching was edited. So it is really hard to be more accurate, no? But of course, for example, there's a debate in the second half of 20th century. Do we use Chinese contemporary commentaries or do we not? Because if we use it, they can give some insight of the text, but also they take out some insight because they are their interpretation, Han Dynasty interpretation, Jin Dynasty interpretation. So how do we deal with commentaries? So it's really interesting. No.
Can you give your own answer to the own question just now? How do we deal with that? I would challenge you to do it properly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very, very simple answer. We do it properly. We do it as we always do. We take it into account and see what happens. There's no fixed. I wonder about this expectation that there must be one fixed answer.
Yeah, but until, for example, until we don't know when was the first Tao Te Ching. There was any first Tao Te Ching, we don't know, because if we take Guodian Tao Te Ching 300 before Christ, there are half of the chapter we have now. How do we take them? As a half Tao Te Ching, or the proto Tao Te Ching, or the selection of Tao Te Ching, or what? But it's really changing, because maybe if a selection of Tao Te Ching, the emperor or the kingdom that wants to write this part of Tao Te Ching was for political purpose. We don't know. So, see, there was anything before that? So, to deal with the old Tao Te Ching, the received text, is to deal with something a little bit difficult, no? Because we don't know the purpose, we don't know a lot of things. So that's the point. I would like to respond to the question.
Thank you very much for
Thank
your enlightening lecture. I have actually two questions. One, probably for all of you, it's clear what is the difference between heaven or the connection and, for example, God, the creator in Christianity. This is one more philosophical, the other more political. How does, like in modern days under the Communist Party, how does Taoism fit to the concepts of the Communist Party? Are there some frictions? For example, I experienced, there was one time a discussion between Viennese philosophers and Chinese experts on Taoism, and the Chinese were some from atheistic universities and two priests of Taoism. And to me it was very sort of priests, I don't know, they had a special clothes or whatever they were, saints, I don't know. But it was funny because they, the Austrians were very polite, not saying anything, controversial, and suddenly these two almost started to argue because the priest said to the other, more just intellectual Taoist expert, you cannot speak about Taoism because you don't practice it. So, how is there some kind of friction between the today's political landscape and the more maybe religious side of Taoism?
To briefly respond to the first question is Tien. There's a lot of meaning. Depends in which context we take it into account. In the case of Taoism, as Tianti, for example, heaven and earth are like the cosmos or the world. No? It's not any transcendental being. No? When we took a transcendental being, can be, for example, when we talk about Shandi in the Lao Tzu, something like outside, not outside, but after the death, the grandfather has a relationship with the soul of the grandfather has a connection with that. But with Tien, there's nothing religious, nothing transcendental, can say. Only the Jesuits took it as something transcendental. But the last question is really interesting because what is the relationship between Communist Party and Taoism today? With the agenda, right now the Xi Jinping agenda is to transform the five religion in the process, to put it, the five religions in the process of Sinization. Sinization. So they have to include in their faith statements some part of Marxism, for example. They have to actualize their rituals to the contemporary Chinese society. And in their agenda, for example, if you compare the agenda of the Chinese Taoist Association, the agenda of Chinese Buddhist Association, and so on, they are not really different. No, the emphasis is the same. They change some key concepts, but the emphasis is the same. One of the emphasis was to build ecological civilization, which is in Buddhism, in Christianity, in the agenda, the faith statement of the all five religions. And there are another interesting case with Taoism, that with the Taoist association, the formation of Taoist association, they tend to synthesize all Taoist schools in two main schools. So part of the Taoist association now, there are two schools, the Chuanzhen and the Zhenyi, which are the biggest one. And they I don't know how to use this term. They try to took other kind of schools and put it in these two biggest schools. So the local school of Maoshan, it now is part of the Chuanzhen. The local school of Wodanshan now is part of Zhenyi. So it's like to synthesize the schools of Taoism in two bigger schools, because it's easiest to understand it, to also to manage maybe. And so this is the idea. Also with the Taoist church around the world. So Taoist church around the world, if they want to be recognized to the Chinese Taoist Association, need to be part of this big school, so Chuanzhen or Zhenyi. If they're not part of this school, they are outside the network of the Taoist Association. So there are some conflict. Who was left outside? Yes. Who is inside? No. So there's the point.
I would be interested maybe in two short questions. Yeah. The first is, should we consider Confucianism as a kind of Taoism? Because that reception of Taoism is evident in Daoist and things like this. And the second is, I am not quite clear about the relation between emptying self. You mentioned three issues.
Yeah.
The first is emptying self, and the third is extending self. So
yeah, the first one is really difficult to answer, because one of the big questions of the last decades inside and outside China was, is Confucianism a religion or not? So there's a lot of answer on one side, on the other side, and there's, of course, from after Ming Dynasty, I can say also after Song Dynasty maybe, there's a lot of influence between Confucianism and Taoism. If you think about Neo-Confucianism, I did a PhD thesis on one Neo-Confucian philosopher who, on one end, was criticizing Buddhism and Taoism. No, they don't understand anything about reality, so on. But at the same time, was taking a lot of concept from them, and he actually start to be a Buddhism before to be to get in the career of Confucian. So it's really difficult to cut between especially
the words of Tao.
Word of Tao, Wu Wei also is also in Confucianism. There's a lot of crossing concept between the two. So now, for example, now it's easiest because we have this kind of association that tends to simplify this kind of thing. So it's easiest to understand it. No, I'm joking, but yeah, it's not so easy to answer. And the other, emptying the self and versus extending the self. There's a connection in this sense that if you empty yourself, empty your ego, you can extend it. If you can merge with we can think about Tianren He. I used to quote because I dealt with that Neo-Confucian philosopher Zhang Cai, who's told about heaven is my father, mother, the earth is my mother.
Western description.
It's the Wang Yangming that says that one leg is, I don't know, or now I'm just not quoting directly, that every part of the world is a part of my body. So this idea, if you can empty yourself, maybe this is a new age understanding of that. I'm having a new age understanding. But if you empty your ego, you can have, you can think about every beings or every part of the nature as part of yourself or your extended self. If you think, if you don't empty yourself, the self is impossible, no? Psychologically speaking. So this is a connection to
so emptying the self is not quite the same like in German we have von sich absehen. So you don't look at all to yourself. You only think altruismus.
No. It's like to think yourself as the other.
Yeah.
That as
so
you are a part of my body.
Okay, this is
speaking.
One process, emptying and extending. In this kind. Yeah.
It's the same as when you arm nature, a part of nature, you are arming yourself. Because it's in connection, in continuity. Because you cannot survive in an healthy environment. You get sick. So if you hurt them, you hurt yourself. This kind of.
Okay. Yeah. So you don't step away from yourself, but you transform it.
Maybe I can suggest to include Wang Yangming when you mention him is Liangzhi. Liangzhi means the beautiful heart or the good heart, the naturally right heart. That is what we all possess, but we have to purify ourselves. Purify, right? We have to work, cultivate ourselves in order to become our true self. So we have our true nature. So it has something to do with transformation, and then you are able to become yourself, not just internally, but increasingly externally too. So you're establishing yourself as a moral character, and this means you're growing again. So because your influence, your legitimate and healthy influence on the environment will increase, and so you are a better person and you can do better in the world. This is the idea.
And the technical term is your original nature is Tianxing. So it's the nature of the cosmos. So it's like this kind. We read a kind of mysticism, but in reality, is more. In Wang Yangming case, is a moral orientation. No, it's like in Taoism more a chi connection, is an energy connection also. So, but also in Wang Yangming. So.